Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here, and in today's video I saw this particular effect by Kaizen Tutorials, right? And it's like the text dissolving into particles and then disappearing into thin air, like the Thanos kind of effect. So I decided to recreate it. He used Blender, but we are going to use Cinema 4D and Mograph, no plugin or no thinking particles or express. So we are going to use normal Mograph to generate the particles and everything. So let's actually get into Cinema 4D and start doing our own version. So I'm in Cinema 4D and I'm using Cinema 4D R26, but everything I'm doing here can be done from my Cinema 4D R20 upwards. All right, so let's straight away go ahead and create our text. So I'll come into my text object and I'll create my text. I'll middle align it and I'll probably change the size. I'll make it a bit bigger, so I'll change it to bold and I'll type in something like pixel. All right, so this is the text that you are going to dissolve. So the first thing we are going to create, what we are going to actually use to dissolve the text is material. So let's go ahead and create our material. So let me come to my material manager, click on this icon and open my material manager. I click on this plus, or I can simply come to create new material. Right, and I'll apply it to my text. I'll double click on it to open our material editor. And now, first of all, I'll check color and reflectance. I want to work with just the luminance for now. So in the luminance, I'll make sure luminance is checked. And I'll come in the textures. I'll choose gradient. You can see in the tutorial, what he used was some sort of noise to do it, but we are going to use gradient. Even though we can use in my 4D noise, like we wouldn't get certain things that we want to do in here. So let me go back. So I'll click on this particular thumbnail here and it will take me into the gradient settings. So what I'm going to do is to create another node. So I'll move this node somewhere here. I'll move this one here and I want to create a third node so that it will be black, white, black, right? So I'll click somewhere here to create another black node and I'll drag it to this side. So now you can see we have black, white, black, and this is what we are going to use to sort of generate the particles. We are going to use Mograph, right? So what another thing you can do is that I can hold shift and select. So I have this one selected. If I hold shift and click this one, it will select this one, and click this one again. You see it has selected all the three. Or we can simply hold shift and click and drag to select all of them. So let me make it a little bit tighter. And now you can see we can move it the way we want. Now you can see each and every letter has its own sort of UV, so it's moving around each and every letter differently, separately. But I want it to see the text as one object, so we are going to change the UV space. So if I come into my object manager, in the material tag, if I select the material tag and come to the attribute, you can see the projection is set to UV mapping, right? So let's change it from UV mapping to something like flat. I think flat will be cool, or cubic. I think cubic will be fine. Either flat or cubic can work in this particular scenario. So I'll change it to cubic. And now if I select the material tag, make sure the object is selected. And I come up here, you can see we have modes: point mode, edge mode, polygon mode, and model mode, and texture mode. I'll select texture mode. And now you can see how our cube is being projected, or the texture is being projected on our text. So now I can select the scale tool and make it a bit bigger. I can move it a bit upwards. And now if I move it, you can see this is how it's moving. Now the reason why we are seeing another version of, like, another part of the white is that it's tiling. So if I come into here, you can see we have tile. If I uncheck tile, you can see now we don't see anything. But let's leave the tiling on, and then let's stretch our cube for it to completely cover our text. So let's come into the front view. I'll click on this one and I'll come into the front view so that we make sure our texture is covering our text completely, and I think this is fine. So now let's bring back our material manager. So I'll double click on the material to bring it, and now let's go into the gradient again. So this is what we are going to animate, right, to sort of bring in our particles. And this is also going to be the glow that starts, you see, when it's dissolving, it starts with a glow and then it begins to dissolve. So let's go ahead and make it a little bit more tighter. I think it's fine. Let's leave it like this. And then let's go ahead and set our keyframe. So I'll bring it to the edge here where the white disappears, right? And I'll set my first keyframe. So I'll click on the gradient. You see we have this icon there, not here. We click on it and now it turns red. And now we've set our first keyframe for the gradient. So I'll move it to frame. Let me actually increase our number of frames to maybe let's make it enough, but I'll move it to frame 150. And now I'll come back to my gradient and I'll move it. So you see the white is coming through here. Let me move our material data on the side. So it disappears again somewhere here, right? And I'll set the keyframe. Now, one thing I should have done earlier before setting the keyframe was to, in the gradient, if I come down here, you can see we have turbulence, right? So I should have actually done that before setting our keyframe. So let's go ahead and do this. Let me put the this thing in the middle, and now let's come down. We have turbulence. Let's increase our turbulence so it's too clean. You can see it's straight line coming in, but I want it to have that noise feel, and that the turbulence is what you are going to use to control it. So if I come into the turbulence and I increase it, you can see now it has a little bit of roughness. And now if I go back, you can see it doesn't come in straight, it comes with a bit of noise. So that's what we should have done so that we know where to start the keyframe from. But we didn't, but we can still go ahead and change our keyframe. So let's increase our turbulence. If we set it to like say 100%, right? You can see it like literally comes from everywhere. So we can actually come down here. We have this checkbox. We can check the absolute, and now affect it from almost every part of the text. But then I want it to have a little bit of feel like it's coming from the right side. So I'll probably reduce the turbulence to like 75, and I think it's fine. We can go in here and like the octaves and stuff, you can increase it, the scale, to make it the noise a bit more tight and everything. Let me actually, you can make this one like say 200 to sort of make it a bit more detailed. We can increase the octaves or reduce it however you want it. So you can play with this to get the kind of feel you want, right? So now let's assume that this is how we want our text. So now let's go back and start the keyframe and make sure at frame 0 we don't see any white or anything anywhere. So let's see if I select it. Okay, at frame 0 looks like everything is fine. So let's go to frame 150. Oh, actually, so it disappears a bit quicker. So at frame 140, everything 142, everything disappears, right? So let's set a keyframe there rather, and let's delete this particular keyframe. So I'll put it on the 150, and I'll click on the red icon for it to delete. And now let's stretch this one to the 150. So now this is the keyframe that you have. If I hit play, you can see it comes in and everything dissolves at frame 150. And this is the animation we want. So we make sure everything is set. This is very important. This is the first stage, and we make sure everything is set here, right? And this is what you are going to use to drive the particles for it to appear, for us to control it, right? The next thing is we are going to use this same particular gradient to affect the alpha, but we would not need all the 3 knots. So how do we do that? So I'll actually come in the gradient, right click on the, in fact let me come into the luminance, right click on the texture, and I'll say copy. So I'll copy the whole thing, the gradient here, and I'll come into the alpha. I'll make sure alpha is checked, and I'll right click and I'll say paste texture, and you can see now everything is disappear. Where it's black it's not showing, and where it's white is where it's showing. So nothing shows, and you see the white comes and it goes, so it disappears again. But we want the it to start showing and then it disappears, right? So what we do is we go in the gradient thumbnail of the alpha, we click on this, and now we delete this first nut, this one, this particular one. You delete it, And now you can see from the start, our text shows, and as the white glue comes in, it disappears. So this is what we want. So basically, we are done with the dissolving of our text, and it's very simple. So ideally, if we're doing this is the only way what we have done without any hassle. So this is the dissolving part of the text. So the next part is going to be the particles, and that we are going to use Mograph. So if I actually check on my color, you can see we have everything and it's dissolving. So I can even change it to any color, like say this blue or something, and see it's dissolving nicely. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our particles using Mograph. So with the particles, ideally, we should have used something like thinking particles or X particles, because in my 4D standard particles can be generated from objects, right? But not everybody has X particles, the Insidium bundle, or the thinking particles too. It's not something I'm really familiar with, and so let's actually use Mograph to do the particles. So first of all, I'll come into the mode and I'll make sure it's set to model mode so that the texture doesn't conflict. And now we are going to use the white parts to generate our particles. So how do we generate our particles? We are going to use matrices. So I'll come into my Mograph menu and I'll choose matrix, right? And the object we want to clone on is the text. But if you clone directly on the text, it wouldn't work. Let me actually come into my Mograph and change the mode to object mode. And if you directly clone on the text like that, you can see it doesn't work. Let me actually it doesn't clone well. So we have to put the text in a connect object. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a connect object. I'll make the text a child of the connect object, right? And in the matrix, the object, instead of putting the text, I'll put the connect rather. But I'll actually name the connect text so that we see what it is. And another thing we have to do is that you can see the texture tag is on the text, but we have to let's move it onto the connect object, right? So you can see now our matrices are being cloned on our text. So you can come into the matrix, it's set to 20 count, can increase it to like probably 10,000. And because it's matrix, it's quite fast. You can see everything will move a bit fast and everything is still okay, but they are too big, so I'll reduce the size of the matrix. So if I come into the transform tab of the matrices, I can reduce it like say 0.3 0.3, right? So that it looks a bit smaller. You can see what's going on. Now, how do we, you see right from the start, the particles, everything are showing, but we don't want it to start right from the start. So how do we use the glowy part that we did earlier to reveal the text to show? So the first thing we are going to use to reveal is the plane effector. So I'll come into my effectors. Let me click this to hide the material manager. So I'll come into my effectors and I'll choose plane effector with the matrix selected. It will immediately affect the matrices, right? So I'll drag the plane effector down and I'll come into its parameters. I'll uncheck position. I want to affect its scale. So I'll check scale. Now I'll put uniform scale -1. So it doesn't show from the beginning, but when we play, immediately the white glow thing starts showing, then it reveals our matrix. That's what we want to use it. So how do we do that? If we come into the plane effector and go to the field tab, we will go to shader, the fields, and you choose shader field, right? So that's what's going to use we are going to use to reveal our matrices. So what you have to tell the shader is that in the shader, if you come down, we can see you have this channel here, right? You have to change it. Let me actually select the shader from the object manager, and now we have only the shaders attributes here. So in the channel, we change it from now, which one? Remember, the glowy part of this material is in the luminance, so you choose luminance, and they'll ask us which materials luminance do you want to use. So we can simply drag and drop it in here, this particular material tag, and now you can see it's in there. We could have also simply click on this picker to choose the material we want to use. So now that we've brought it in, if I hit play, something will be happening. You can see, let me actually hide the text. So you can see the matrices will be popping. See, there's a bit of flickering, but it's what's happening, that it's the reverse is what's happening. The whole thing is showing, and then the particle pops up, disappears and comes back. But we want the other way around. We want the whole thing not to be showing. The particle shows up and disappears, right? So how do we do that? So we go into the plane effector, the fields, and because we want the reverse version of it, we can invert it. So if I come into the modifiers here, field modifiers here, I click and hold it, you can see you have all these modifiers, and we are going to use the invert modifier. So now if I hit play, you can see it pops up and disappears, right? That's good. But we don't want it to disappear this quick. We want it to stay for a bit before it disappears. So what we have to do is we have to add another modifier called the decay modifier. So we sort of decay. I think the delay also can also do that, but I'll use the decay for now, right? And with the decay, it shouldn't be before, it shouldn't be after the invert. So I have to bring the invert on top of the decay, right? And now I'll increase the decay to like say 80, 84 or something. Now if I hit play, you can see it reveals it. It stays for some time and now it disappears. So that's what we are going to use to reveal our particles. We can actually increase our frames as well, and now you can see it stays for some time before it disappears. All right, so now let's go into our, so now basically now we have we can bring our particles, reveal our particles, right? So then the next thing is to how do we affect our particles, let it move about or something. So with that, we are going to use the time effector. So with the matrix selected, I'll come into my effectors and I'll choose my time effector. I'll drag it down as well, and now if I hit play, you can see right from the beginning, okay, it's not showing because it's rotating, so you might not see. So if I come into the time effector, it parameters, now rotation is on. You want to move its position as well. So maybe I can, let's say, move it to minus like probably 60 or something, 70. I want it to come forward like to us. Maybe move it a little bit upwards, and let's say move it on the side as well. But you can see what's happening is that it's moving all about, not necessarily directly coming forward to us or moving on the side. It's moving all about, and that's because the space of every particular particle or every particular matrix is based on the normal of these polygons, right? So each of them has their own positioning and everything. For it to obey the up, side, and all of that of the cinema 4D, you have to change the space, the transform space, to either the effector space or the object space, right? Because that one has one direct space. So let's put it to the effector space, right? And now you can see it's moving on the side and coming forward. So if I go back now and hit play, you can see right away the particles are moving forward to us and going on the side. So this is something that we want, right? The next is, you see, everything comes to, first of all, the next is that immediately the particles start moving, coming out, the time start affecting it. So it doesn't actually generate at where the glow stuffs are. So you see, this is ideally what I wanted, like it will show where the glow pops up before it disappears. But then because of the time, it moves it away from it. So we want it to gradually move away from the glow. It doesn't have to affect it right from the start. So with that, you are going to also use another shader. So in the time effector, come to the fields, and now you can use another shader field. So I'll add shader field, and now which shader? We are going to use the alpha part. So we only want the time effector to take effect when the whole disappear, like the alpha has taken over, right? So when the it's getting empty, then now the time shader takes control of the particles. And with that, the same thing we use to control the alpha of our text is what we are going to use to control this shader. So we select the shader, come to the fields, and you can see the channel. We change it to which particular channel, which is the alpha, right? And they ask us which object alpha. So you can use the picker here, click on it, and you click on this material, and you can see it has brought it in. And now it only affects the places where the alpha has affected, right? But it's doing another thing. It's doing the reverse of the same thing. So now it's bringing them back instead of sending them away. So we can go into the time effector, go into the field, and do the same thing, invert. So I'll come into my modifiers here, and I'll choose invert, and now you can see it's pushing them away. So if I hit play, you can see now it's pushing them away, right? But it comes in too clean, and it's like you can see the text pushing away. It's clean with this in particles and everything. There's a bit of turbulence and stuff in the air that makes it move all over the place. So with that, you are going to use random effector. So with the matrix selected again, random effector is going to be our third effector. And if I come in here and I choose random, I'll drag it down as well. And if you hit play, you can see straight away the randomness has affected everything, right? But we don't want it that way. We want to have a little bit of control, right? So first of all, I'll come into the randomness parameters, and we will leave everything as default. So now let's come into the effector tab, and in there, from the random mode, we will change it to noise and probably reduce the animation speed to something like 10% and the scale to like 50%, right? So if we hit play, let's see what we have. I can see we have a bit of randomness in the text, but it looks a bit rough and like some of the particles sort of pops. So for us to get it a bit smooth, we have to add another effector, and you're going to add the delay effector. Now before I add the delay effector, with the randomness as well, you can see if I hit play, immediately right from the start, the randomness starts affecting it. So we want it to affect only the places where the alpha has affected. So let's use the same thing we did for the time effector. So I'll select the random, come to its field, and I'll scroll down the time effector, and I'll drag in the shader field into the randomness field, and you can see we will have similar issue, so we have to invert it. So I'll click on invert, and now it should be fine. So if I hit play now, you can see our particles are moving out, right? So the next thing we are going to add is that some of the particles are quite poppy. If I hit play, you can see it moves quick straight there and begins to slow down. But I want it to smoothly transition from where it starts to the end. And the reason why it's doing that is because of the time, because the time effector starts right from frame 0. So if it starts moving at, let's say, frame 90, it quickly moves to the position it would have been if it had started moving from frame 0. So that's why it kind of moves that quickly. So for us to get a bit of smooth movement, we have to add the delay effectors. So I'll select the matrix, and I'll come to my effectors, and I'll choose delay effector. I'll drag it down as well, and I'll probably increase the delay effector strength to probably 80 something. 85 will be fine. And now if I hit play, let's see what we have. You can see now our particles are smoothly moving like they are disintegrating, right? So that's basically how you do something like this. So from here going, what's left is that maybe how you want to make your particles move. So if you want it to move a bit on the alpha, I can select the time effector, come to its parameters, and I'll say I want it to go up a bit, and maybe reduce the rate at which it's going on the side, and maybe let's see what happens if we hit play and see it's different. So from here going, it's the way you want it. And maybe if you want our particles to disappear early, we can come into the plane effector, go into the fields, and select the decay modifier and reduce that effect strength to like probably 75, and let's see what happens with that as well. So if you hit play, so from here going, you can just be playing around to kind of see the effect you want to get. So let's assume this is what we want, right? Everything is fine. Now let's go ahead and see how we will render the matrix, because matrix on its own don't render. So what we have to do is we have to create a clone, because unless we are using something like a render like Redshift or Arnold or Octane or something, but Cinema 4D standard can render matrix. For us to render the matrix, you have to clone it. So to do that, it's just as simple as creating a clone object, putting in something like a sphere. So I'll create a sphere. I'll reduce the size to like probably 5 centimeters. 5 centimeters, and I'll make it a child of the clone. And in the clone, I'll change the mode from grid to object, and the object we want to clone on is the matrix. So I'll now drag in the matrix. But before I do that, let me actually select the clone and make sure it's set to multi-instance, right? So that it renders, it moves quickly. It doesn't slow our scene. So now I can drag in the matrix, and now if I hit play, everything is fine. Now if we hit render, you can see our particles, and you can see the disintegration and this dissolve of our text and everything, right? So maybe I can make the sphere a bit bigger. I can make it 10, and let's see what we have. Right, so now you can see, we can see our spheres, they are quite big. Probably 10 is too big, so it's fine. And now if I hit render, it's cool. Now, if for the glowy part of the text where it sort of glows, right, the edge, if you want to render it in Cinema 4D, let me actually hide the matrices, and we are left with just the clones. So if you want to render it so that you can actually add glow effect to the white part of the text in After Effects or something, so that's what we have to do. So let me actually show you how you do that. So let's assume everything we are doing here, we are fine with it, right? So what I'll do is I'll create material. So we have a blue material for the text, and now the material for the particles, I'll create a new material. So I'll create a text material here, and I'll apply it to the clone object, right? Now what you have to do is that, because probably you want to have control over the particles and add glue to it, you have to add object buffers to it. So I'll right click on the clone, and I'll come to render tags, and I'll add compositing tag. And in the compositing tag, you can see we have object buffer tag. So I'll choose object buffer 1, and maybe if you want, you can add the same thing to the text as well. So I can right click on the text, add render tag compositing, and then I'll make it object buffer 2. So now let's come into the rendering aspect. So if I hit the render settings and come into render, right, I have to make sure multipass is checked, and then in the multipass tab here, if I click on it, I have to bring in object buffer, right? So the group ID is set to 1, and now I have to create another one, which I have to set the group ID to 2. So we have the 2 object buffer set here. The next is the white part, the glowy part that we are going to use in After Effects. And that one, remember, we did it on the luminance of the material, right? So we can come into the multipass, and if you come down here, you can see we have material luminance. So if I enable the material luminance, now if we render, we will get just the white part alone on its own, right? So now if we hit play, let's assume we like it the way it is, right? Now if I come into save, and I'll probably, I shouldn't even save it, right? So I can add alpha. All of these things are things you have to do when you are doing your final render, and I'll probably set this one to PNG or whatever format you want it, and all of that. And now you won't save it for now, but let's go ahead and render a frame. So I'll render this particular frame, and now you can see we have our thing, object done rendering. Now let's go into layers. Here you can see the tab layers, and in the layers, let's check the passes. So we have single pass and multi-pass. Let's choose single pass, and now you can see if I click on the luminance, now you can see only the white part that's showing. So this is what you apply glue to when you send it into After Effects, and this is the alpha part, which contains everything. This is the object buffer 1. This contains only the particles, and this object buffer 2, which contains only the text. So this is how you actually set up your rendering and take it into After Effects to go ahead and add glues and stuff into it. This is basically how you do something like this. I hope this was useful and you liked it. This is one way that you can do it. So the downside with this kind of technique is that when you have a material which you want to adjust, let's say this texture for it to fit, maybe you have something which has a bit of roughness and you want it to fit in a certain way, you can't adjust the texture, or because of the alpha, if you adjust the texture, it will affect the whole thing, everything in here. So there is a way actually around it, which you can actually use the vertex weight through using the, even though the texture and everything, you can use it through vertex map to be able to affect the alpha of your object. Meanwhile, whilst the object is having its own UV space, so you can do it. And if you are interested in another way of doing the same particular effect using the vertex weight, let me know in the comment section, and I'll go ahead and do a second video that explains that one as well. But I hope this one was useful and you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll kindly like to have your feedback about everything. All right, see you in the next one.